Day 21 of the Ukraine invasion. This was Kiev this morning. Look at these pictures. Another residential complex was bombed. Ukraine's capital is now a clear target of Russian forces. At least 4 multi-story buildings have been destroyed. Scores of people have died. Across Ukraine, Russia is intensifying aerial attacks. The focus is no more on just taking cities. The Russians seem to be prepared to destroy cities if needed. Why the sudden escalation? Perhaps to build pressure in talks. Ukraine's president says there is room for compromise. Is Moscow trying to squeeze more concessions from Kiev by bombing Ukraine? What will be the terms of this truce? And will Ukraine agree to Russia's demands? On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss all of this and more. First to the battleground, where fighting continues in major cities. Russia has changed tactics. They're picking Ukrainian targets and firing missiles at them. Ukraine says civilians are being struck and that 2/3 of Russian rockets have hit civilian establishments. Of course, Russia denies all of these charges. Their president, Vladimir Putin, has justified the actions of his forces. This is what he said.
In terms of the military tactics developed by the Russian Ministry of Defense and the General Staff, they have been completely justified. And our lads, soldiers and officers have shown bravery and heroism. And they are doing everything that they can to avoid loss of civilian life in Ukrainian cities.
Putin also said Russian forces do not want to occupy Ukraine. Kiev, understandably, does not trust Moscow. It is trying to project strength. Last night, their parliament held an emergency session. The Ukrainian parliament. This was in Kiev. More than 350 lawmakers were present. Together, they sang the national anthem. Ukraine has extended martial law by 30 days. The government has approved more military spending, but they're going to need more help to turn the tide. Their president, the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, continues to try to rally for global support. Today, he addressed the U.S. Congress and made a simple demand from American lawmakers. Give us more weapons, he said. Listen to this.
Russian troops have already fired nearly 1,000 missiles at Ukraine. Is this a lot to ask for? To create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people, is this too much to ask? Aircraft that can help Ukraine, help Europe. And you know that they exist and you have them, but they are on earth, not in the Ukrainian skies. They do not defend our people.
Strong words by Zelensky there. He needs all the support he can get. Talks with Russia are at a critical stage. Ukraine says there is room for compromise. Russia says they're close to a compromise deal. That's the word, that's the term they used, compromise deal. So what's holding them back? Look at Russia's demands. Number one, Russia wants a neutral Ukraine. What does that mean? Neutral means no NATO membership. And Ukraine seems willing to concede on that front. Zelensky has said as much, that Ukraine can roll back its bid to join NATO. Not like NATO is taking Ukraine in a hurry. They've kept Ukraine waiting for 14 years. And after this war, it's damaged goods. All sides get that. So concession on the NATO membership bid is very much up for discussion. Demand number two, the status of Crimea, also Donetsk and Luhansk, the 2 territories controlled by Russian separatists. Vladimir Putin declared them independent republics last month, just before the war began. He annexed Crimea in 2014. Now he wants all of this to be accepted, for Crimea to be recognized as part of Russia and for Donetsk and Luhansk to be accepted as independent territories. These are the Russian demands. How far is Ukraine prepared to relent? What does Ukraine want from these talks? First of all, security guarantees. Stop the attacks. Russia seems ready to discuss this.
A neutral status is being seriously discussed in connection, of course, with security guarantees. This is exactly what President Putin said in February at one of his press conferences. Any possible options, any generally acceptable security guarantees for Ukraine and all countries, including Russia, with the exception of NATO expansion. Now it is exactly this. You quoted Zelensky, what is being discussed at the negotiations now. There are concrete formulations that, in my view, are close to being agreed.
The defense ministers of NATO met today. They said they welcomed the progress in Russia-Ukraine talks, but reports also say that NATO military commanders are working on a new project. They're drawing up military plans with Russia in mind. They're expected to ramp up deployments in Eastern Europe, send more troops and missile defense systems to the region, not to Ukraine, to Eastern Europe. Next week, NATO leaders will gather in Brussels for a summit. That's where these plans could be discussed. Meanwhile, the sanctions war is intensifying. Russia versus the West. After the West sanctioned Russia, Russia has sanctioned top American leaders. It's an interesting list. It includes US President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, other key members of Team Biden like the National Security Advisor, the CIA chief, even the White House press secretary, plus Biden's son, Hunter Biden. He too has been sanctioned. Interestingly, the list also features Hillary Clinton. The fighting in Ukraine may end, but the war between Russia and America looks set to continue, and it's dividing the world. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.